Some weights change the way you walk forever, and some the way you live. My name is Marek Hale. 8 years ago, I carried a cello that wasn't mine. For a girl who had just survived a surgery most people only whisper about. Her name was Elowen Rook. A year later, she could lift the bow again. 8 years later, her music became the anthem that moves strangers to sign their names and say, "Yes, if I go, let someone stay, but I'm getting ahead of myself." It began in a hospital corridor that always smelled like lemon cleaner in winter. I was delivering supplies at night, the kind of job you take when you're trying not to think too loudly. My sister Ari had died waiting for a liver. Silence had been my language since. On a cart by the elevator sat a black cello case with a frayed teal ribbon on the handle. A nurse said, "Family's not here yet." I said, "I'll take it to recovery." I pressed my palm under the handle, felt a single splinter in the leather dig into my skin, and for the first time in months, pain made sense. Inside recovery, Elowen slept. A pale halo of hair stuck to her forehead. Soft beeps, a green line climbing, falling. The surgeon whispered, "Successful transplant." No one clapped. Someone just sighed the way an old door finally opens. I set the cello case down. Her hand twitched, as if finding an invisible bow. On the case, that teal ribbon. On the floor, a small cracked amber rosin in torn paper. A pencil note scrawled on it. "Play like breathing." I pocketed the paper to keep it from getting tossed in the cleaning shift. I would return it. That's all, I told myself, just return it. But when she woke, and the nurse said her family was stuck in traffic, she saw me and said, dry but steady, "Is it safe?" "Your cello?" I said. She nodded. "I'll keep it close," I said, "until you can." I carried that cello for a year. Not to make a point, not even to be kind. I carried it because I needed something heavy that wasn't grief. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I finished my shift, signed out, and met Elowen at the rehabilitation center 2 bus lines away. I learned the rhythm of her struggle. 10 steps and breathe. 10 more and lean. Hands shaking, lips pressed thin. Then the tiniest smile when the metronome ticked, and her fingers found the A string without looking. She never asked for money. I never had any. But I brought her a gift that cost me something different. Time I owed my sleep. Sweat I owed my body. And a piece of my past I'd been guarding like a relic. You see, my sister Ari had left me a brass metronome, dented on one corner. Warmth trapped in the metal from all the times she had wound it and called it the heartbeat I can borrow. One evening, Elowen's hand wouldn't stop trembling. Her bow skittered. She laughed once, brittle as frost. "Maybe I'm done," she whispered. I took the metronome from my backpack and set it beside her sheet music. Tick, tick, like footsteps out of a long room. "This was my sister's," I said. "It's the only thing of hers that still feels warm." "Then you should keep it," she said. "I am," I said, "by watching it keep you." She stared at the dent. Her shoulders let go just a little. The bow settled. The note came out like fog turning to river. Here's the part that made the effort real, not sweet. Carrying the cello wasn't a stroll. It was a promise. The case thumped my knee. The strap carved my shoulder. A supervisor warned me about being late to the warehouse on Fridays. "Another tardy and you're out, Hale." I started running stairs instead of elevators to save 2 minutes. I learned to lean the case against my leg on crowded buses so it didn't swing and hit someone. I missed a friend's wedding. I missed my own birthday without noticing until the end of the week. A month in, my palms were pinched raw where the teal ribbon's knot rubbed. I kept a bandage in my wallet next to the rosin note. Play like breathing. The splinter in the handle never came out. It left a small crescent scar in my palm, a bright comma that kept talking. Elowen had her own battles. Stairwells that felt like cliffs. Fingers that forgot, then remembered, then forgot again. A bow hold rebuilt from the bones outward. There were days she wept without sound, and days she laughed so hard the physical therapist cried too. Once, after a shaky scale, she looked at me and said, "Marek, sometimes I hate that someone had to die so I could play again." I said nothing. Then I said, "Sometimes I hate that someone didn't when Ari needed it." We sat there with both truths breathing between us like a dark animal that agreed not to bite. The story tried to tug toward a neat circle. Life refused, in small and merciful ways. On the first snowy day, she insisted on carrying the cello herself across the slush, slipped and landed laughing. Again, she said, hoisting it one step, two. I hovered a foot away, hands ready, not touching. That was the beginning of her taking back the weight. By spring, she was playing scales at sunrise in the echo of a parking garage because she liked how the sound fell and climbed the concrete. People stopped. A kid on a scooter said, "It sounds like the building is singing with you." "Elle," I said after, "you make hollow places answer." She didn't flinch at praise, but she kept flinching at the idea of audiences. "Eventually," I said. "Eventually," she agreed, which is just a brave person's way of saying not yet. The year closed with a small recital in a church basement that smelled like coffee and crayons. Elowen placed the brass metronome on the piano and said, so quietly that only the first row heard, "This belongs to someone who couldn't wait, and to the person who couldn't keep waiting." Her bow lifted. The room held its breath. She played a piece I'd never heard before, notes stepping carefully, then running, then stopping as if remembering a name and saying it aloud. When it ended, there was no thunder. Just a soft, exact applause, like people clapping for a bird that decided not to crash into a window. After, she pressed the cracked amber rosin into my hand, wrapped again in that torn paper note. "Keep this safe for me," she said. "For the day I know what I'm writing." I nodded. And then life moved us apart the way tides decide the shoreline. She moved to another city. I changed shifts. Numbers replaced notes. We texted sometimes, and then not at all. I kept the rosin in my coat pocket. Winter to winter, it tapped my leg like a small reminder. Tick, tick. 8 years later, in late autumn, a poster on a community board stopped me cold. A hand-drawn teal ribbon. A title? Borrowed Light, a work for strings and silence by Elowen Rook. A line beneath it. In partnership with the Organ Network. Premier proceeds support donor families. My heart knocked twice, then settled into that old metronome rate. I went. I brought the brass metronome and the cracked rosin tucked in their paper. The auditorium smelled like new wood and rain in wool coats. The small knot, the one every story hides just before the end, came wearing a lanyard and a doubtful smile. "Ticket?" the usher asked. I patted my pockets. I had left the printed stub on my kitchen table. I held up the metronome like a passport from a country that didn't exist. "Sir, we can't." "Tell her," I said, hearing how foolish it sounded. "Tell her Marek is here." "Sir," the usher repeated, kind because there were people behind me. I stepped aside. The lobby hummed with voices, plastic cups, programs flipping. I considered leaving. 8 years is a long time. People become myths. Maybe this was all my private eternity. Then a hand touched my sleeve. A woman with gray at her temple, Organ Network badge on a cord, said, "Did you say Marek?" "Yes," I said. She took in the metronome, the dent, the way I held it as if it had a pulse. "Wait," she said. "You should wait." In the hall, the lights dimmed. I found a standing spot by the last row moments before silence unfurled like dark velvet across the room. Elowen walked out holding her cello. The teal ribbon had been replaced with a clean new one, but the case still had a ghost of the old knot's imprint. She didn't look older so much as finished, the way a road looks like a destination at dusk. She sat. She set a small object on a stool beside her. Another metronome. Tick, tick. Then she did a thing I'd never seen. She reached out and stilled the metronome with 2 fingers. The room's silence deepened. A hush inside a hush. She lifted the bow and let it hover. That fragile moment where the whole world is an inhale. And began. Borrowed Light didn't try to be pretty at first. It scraped, it knocked, it remembered hospital machines and buses and shoes wet with slush. It widened into a river you step into waist deep and say, "I'll be colder if I get out." Midway through, the strings grouped into a chord that sounded like people standing in a circle saying each other's names. And then, above it, a thin line of melody rose and held steady like a hand not trembling anymore. I don't remember crying. I remember the metronome in my pocket ticking though I hadn't wound it. I remember my palm stinging where the old splinter scar suddenly felt new. At the end, Elowen lowered her bow and did not smile. She looked at the audience the way you look at a wide night sky, and said into the quiet, "This is for the ones who gave us more time to learn the words." Applause didn't come right away. It came like rain that has to cross a field first. The small knot tightened again when people crowded around the stage. How do you cross 8 years and a sea of strangers? I stayed where I was, metronome heavy as a heart I couldn't hand over. Then, from the wings, the woman with the organ network badge appeared at the aisle and beckoned. "Come," she mouthed. Backstage smelled like rosin and coffee and the particular electricity that follows music. Elowen stood with her cello leaning against her hip. She was talking to a young man with the same cautious strength I remembered in her mirror. When she saw me, she paused, eyes narrowing the way people look into a bright window at night and see their own reflection first. I began. "Marek?" she said, not quite believing it, the name like a note she hadn't tuned for a while. I held up the brass metronome and the cracked rosin wrapped in the torn paper. "You left these with me," I said, "for the day you knew what you were writing." She reached for the rosin first. Her fingers shook, not with weakness, but with the gravity of a planet finding its moon. "You kept them," she said. "You kept us." "I kept weight," I said. "It kept me." For a beat, we only listened to the ticking, but there was no ticking. The metronome was still. The sound was us. The pulse of an old corridor, the memory of a bus breaking, a teal ribbon knot releasing. I told her about Ari then. Not the whole story, just enough to place a lantern in the room. She didn't apologize. She set her palm over the dent in the metronome and said, "Then this piece is for her too." She looked down at my hand, at the small crescent scar. "Still there?" She smiled. "Some weights," I said, "you don't put down. You learn to carry them so someone else can play." She laughed softly, then grew serious, the way bow hair tightens before the note. "They asked me to pick a national theme for the donor registry campaign," she said. I almost said no. I didn't know if I could write something that didn't sound like we were grateful for the impossible. "You did," I said. "You wrote the sound of staying." She placed the rosin in my pocket as if returning a coin to a river. Then she took the metronome and set it on the piano. She wound it once. "Tick. Keep time with me," she said. So we did. Just for a minute. Just until the sound stopped being a sound and became a room where people decide to leave the lights on for each other. No sermon. No banner. Only a bow hovering, then resting, and a metronome's pendulum coming to center. Quiet as a chest that keeps breathing after the song ends.